Hello everybody, my name is Nick Harris. I'm a Business Recovery Director here at Francis Clark. I'm a Chartered Accountant, I'm a licensed insolvency practitioner, and today I'm going to talk to you about the world of insolvency. I'm going to give you an update on the market, some thoughts on the market, what my predictions are for the future, and I'm going to talk to you about how and why you might want to acquire a distressed business. I'm going to give you some examples of how to do that, and I'm going to talk you through the potential risks, but the potential advantages and why you might want to do that. Then finally, I'm going to round up and talk to you about why you might want to know a rather friendly insolvency practitioner like myself. So I'm going to start with the personal insolvency market. So that's for when an individual goes into a formal insolvency procedure. So on the screen we've got three different coloured lines that add together to give you the black line, the total individual insolvencies in the market since February 2019 through to February 2024. So the green line at the bottom of the screen, that's for bankruptcy. So that's where an individual has liabilities that are more than their assets. That includes their contingent liabilities, so prospective liabilities, or that individual can't pay their debts as they fall due. So with regards to a bankruptcy, quite a lot of people are pushed into bankruptcy by a creditor. So that would be typically by HMRC or a financial institution. And an individual can make themselves bankrupt, so they can petition online to make themselves bankrupt. And you can see from the line there that bankruptcy is at a historically low level, which isn't great news for somebody like myself, because the only personal insolvencies I deal with myself are for bankruptcies. I don't deal with either the blue or the pink lines. So the blue lines, that's debt relief orders, which are, I would refer to those as bankruptcy light. They're for individuals who've got assets of less than £2,000. That's actually being increased at the moment to £4,000. And for individuals who've got creditors of less than £30,000, which again, the limit is going up to £50,000. So all I'm seeing happening there is more people going into DROs, debt relief orders, which is a streamlined, quicker process compared to bankruptcy, and the bankruptcy numbers going down even more, and more people going into debt relief orders. And also there's a £90 fee for a debt relief order that's just been waived as well, so you don't really have to pay to make yourself into a debt relief order. So I can see those numbers of DROs going up in the future. Individual voluntary arrangements, that's where an individual, usually with the help of an insolvency practitioner, puts together a contract to compromise their debts and pay them off over a longer period of time, or get some relief from those debts. And that's always been historically the largest number in the personal insolvency market. And you can see they're on the rise at the moment, which probably isn't a surprise, because I think everyone's aware there's a particular cost of living crisis going on. Interest rates are particularly high at the moment, which is meaning that a lot of people are looking for help with their debts, potentially through an IVA, and a lot of people have traditionally used an IVA, probably not always entirely necessary, to avoid the stigma of going bankruptcy, which, as I said, probably isn't necessary, but a lot of people do still use an IVA in order to avoid that. And an awareness that IVAs, debt relief orders, bankruptcy, all do go on your personal credit rating for the next 6 years, so no real difference on that level. But I'm imagining IVAs are going to stay particularly high at the moment. With regards to the numbers, in the last the last month in February 2024, there was 10,136 insolvency cases, all through between the three of them for personal insolvency. And this is a rise on February 2023, where there was only 8,000 cases. So you can see the market is busier than it was a year ago. So moving on, some bankruptcy in the news. So some people will recognise the lady on the left of the screen. So that's Jordan, or Katie Price. She owed £762,000 to HMRC, and she's actually been made bankrupt for the second time. So she's got actually a second bankruptcy in place at the moment. She had to have her hearing online suspended when she got made bankrupt, because the process, they were unsure as to who the people in the room were, whether they were actually creditors of hers, or when it was actually the press trying to get into to understand what was going on with their bankruptcy case. She's had her discharge suspended indefinitely, so she's going to remain bankrupt, and all those restrictions of bankruptcy are going to stay with her indefinitely until she complies with her trustee in bankruptcy. So she's going to remain bankrupt for an extended period of time. And I've got Horizon on screen now. I think probably everybody's aware of the post office scandal that's around at the moment, or the shortfall compensation scheme. after the ITV dramatisation. So there's been 74 bankruptcies that have been made up as part of the Horizon shortfall compensation scheme, and 25 of these the Post Office has admitted they've caused the bankruptcy, and untangling, annulling these bankruptcies. So an annulment is where a bankruptcy effectively gets backtracked as if it never would have happened. But there's a complication to this, obviously, with the Post Office involved, and to see how these 25 cases unwind is going to be particularly interesting for everybody. Moving on to, this is my world, corporate insolvency. I probably spend 95% plus of my time dealing with corporate insolvency. You can see from the screen there that the blue line, the creditors' voluntary liquidations, they are the real drivers in the market. You can see that most of the insolvency cases are creditors' voluntary liquidations. So that's where directors of a company come to see somebody like myself. They've either got to the point where they can't trade anymore because of cash flow problems, or they've made a proactive decision that they can't turn around the financial position of the company, and they want to put it into a liquidation, a terminal insolvency procedure. And you can see they are particularly high at the moment, CVLs. And then the green line, talking about those at the bottom of the screen, compulsory liquidation. So that's where a creditor forces a company into an insolvency process. So somebody will petition to wind a company up. Quite a lot of that is driven by HMRC. They're one of the main participators in the compulsory liquidation market, and that is because HMRC, apart from potentially going on site and picking up people's assets, the only real method, which is costly, the only real method HMRC have got of chasing debts is through winding up petitions and issuing petitions to wind companies up. As you can see, during the 2020s and 2021, the courts, there was a lack of court hearings, there was restrictions on what creditors could do to get a company wound up if they weren't paying. There was lots of protection for people who wouldn't pay. So those numbers were particularly low, those court-driven liquidations. And now that's starting to unwind a little bit. And I'm well aware from some of the cases that I deal with that HMRC are probably not being as friendly as they were in previous years. So HMRC are looking to try and get some of their money back. And another thing to note with those compulsory liquidations is HMRC have retraced and got their second preferential status. So what this means is that in an insolvency procedure, when all the assets are realised, when there's money being paid to creditors, HMRC have pushed themselves massively, and this is in the last couple of years, have pushed themselves massively back up the queue of people who get paid. So there's an incentive for HMRC to wind people up if they don't think they're going to get paid by the company anyway. So they're going to get more out of that than what they would have previously. And then the other insolvencies, the pink line. The reason why that's of interest is that's what I would call rescue procedures. So that's your CVAs, your administrations. So on both of those processes, you've got a business, not necessarily in the same company format, but you've got a business that comes out the other side that is hopefully either a new entity or a restructured entity that means that continues into the future, better returns creditors as a rule. So those procedures are on the rise as well, which shows that people are coming to see people like myself a bit earlier. But generally, if you look at the market, too many people aren't coming early enough, and there's a lack of options available to people. So they're going into a liquidation procedure, a creditor voluntary liquidation, because they're not coming soon enough. And the actual numbers, just to go through what actually happened in the February 2024 stats, just so people are aware. So there was 2,102 registered company insolvencies in February 2024. Of these, the CVLs were 12% higher than in February 2023. The compulsory liquidations were 35% higher than in February 2023, and your administrations were 54% higher than in 2023. So all of those are on the rise, and from somebody who's on the coalface, I would say that the market is particularly busy. There's some high-profile casualties in the market at the moment. So we've got Ted Baker on the left-hand side. That's close to my wife's heart. 975 staff across 46 stores, some of them in the southwest. Prospective administrators talking to a number of interested parties, potentially taking these stores on. So hopefully we won't use Ted Baker stores from the high street. The Body Shop, 1,000 employees. And that company is obviously going through a restructuring process through administration at the moment. There's been some political pressure from MPs to put pressure on the IP to go through the consultation and redundancy process with regards to the staff, and that's quite interesting from my point of view, in that, again, as I said earlier, if people aren't coming to an insolvency practitioner early enough for their advice, it leaves a lack of process where you can actually go through that formal consultation period. In some cases you need to give in excess of 90 days in the consultation period. You just haven't got the time to do that. So how that probably the two interact is that you can't consult sometimes in insolvency procedures. So I'm not quite sure where the MP is going with that. Something that's close to my heart, Torquay United, currently in administration, lifelong fan. I'm hoping that there might be a prospective buyer out there who might rescue the club and take it back to where it belongs in the Football League. So watch this space with that one. Brady Construction Services there, company that's actually, we're dealing with the insolvency here at Francis Clark, Southwest-based company, across Cornwall in the southwest, £4 million in debt, and over 200 creditors. So something that's particularly local and interesting. And then everyone's seen about Birmingham City Council and the other councils across the country that are struggling financially, and some of them have been placed into special measures. So new spending projects aren't allowed at the moment under that regime. So that's another high-profile insolvency case that's out there in the market at the moment. My thoughts and what other people think about what's going to happen in the insolvency market at the moment. So the Centre for Economic Business and Research, the CEBR, predicting 33,000 insolvencies this year. That's actually a 30% increase on 2023. So if you go back to that slide, it's going to be even higher than it was last year. So they're predicting that's going up. I'm not quite sure those first quarter numbers are actually showing that at the moment, but that's their prediction. And the reason for that is because their understanding, and it kind of rings true with my thoughts on the market as well, is that when you've got some economic issues, if you've got a particular pressure in the market on individuals that hits the demand, then you get 2 years usually between that lag, or maybe longer between that lag and when you actually see some proper economic insolvency, economic failure in the market. So you get that debt overhang. I put on screen there, the cost of living crisis is going to continue. Well, there's been some relatively good news in the press today that potentially the second quarter we're going to see a slight growth in economic output for the country, which is good, obviously, and potentially the country's moving away from a recession. Will we see some interest rate cuts this year? I think I read in the Times yesterday there's a potential for 2 before a prospective election at some point later in the year. So that will be good for people's individual finances if they're on variable rate tracker products. And then what I put at the bottom there, the accountant who took out 3 bounce back loans has given a 12-year director's ban, must repay £75,000. What I think you might see more of in the press this year is potentially more of this, because I just mentioned there's an election going on, and there's been a mass, and there's been calculations that you've seen in the press, £4 billion, £5 billion of abuse of the COVID support that was given to businesses during the lockdowns, and how much money has been potentially abused and taken away. And obviously the insolvency service will be given these additional powers to go after directors that have done this. But surprisingly, only 58 directors have been prosecuted to date. And I think there might be a bit of an incentive on the insolvency service to look out and see where they could potentially take some more action against people. So expect to see more of that in the press, I think, this year. So moving on to the more techie area of my presentation, about distressed businesses. So how you potentially could acquire one, why you might want to do it, opportunities and risks to be aware of. I'm going to talk through 3 examples that I've dealt with in my time being an insolvency practitioner, and on those cases kind of give you some ideas of what good aspects there's been for purchasers on each of those. Thing to be aware of, this is a real opportunity for entrepreneurs out there. The probably thing I get asked most is probably directors' duties and when directors are potentially at personal risk and what they should and shouldn't be doing in that twilight zone. But the thing I get asked the most by entrepreneurial people is, how can I buy a distressed business? How can I buy some assets from a distressed business? How can I get a bargain? How can I get ahead in these scenarios? How should I do it? So I'm going to give you a little bit of a rundown of my thoughts on this. I've put on screen, it can be messy. I say it can be messy, but what this really should mean is that the more distress a business is under, so the more cash pressure they're under, the more potentially aggressive you can be with your price, even more of a bargain you can pick up. Purchasers need to be brave. You're probably not going to have a lot of time to do due diligence. Your price and offer should probably reflect this. An insolvency practitioner won't sell you assets or a business with any warranties or guarantees that you normally get in a normal transaction. So be aware that you're going to be, as I've said there, sold as seen, so the risk is for the buyer mainly on all sides. And I'm going to cover a pre-pack administration that I've dealt with, but 2P and consultation risks for the purchaser are usually quite big in these scenarios, and potentially something to consider. So I've got their options. So if you're going to buy a business that's in distress, the two main ways to do it, there's only real two ways to do it, is through a share sale, a share purchase. This is very risky because you're taking on all the unknown creditors. You take on everything. So if there's some old historic claims that don't come out in the short period you've got to buy this business, then that sits on you as the purchaser owning those shares. There is a way to do this through a company voluntary arrangement, a CVA, and I'm going to give you an example of how that worked really well and how the purchaser got probably a potentially very good deal out of that. Or you can purchase the assets, and this will give you a clean break from the old company. So you don't take on any of the liabilities of the old company, but you will do this likely under a pre-pack administration or liquidation. So something to be aware of in the employees there. When you're purchasing the assets of the company, you're not going to be buying any assets that aren't owned by the company if you're doing it through an insolvency process. So if those companies got assets that at least HP, or if they're stock under retention of title, you're going to need to perform your own views on these assets and potentially how you're going to actually purchase those or speak to the potential provider of those assets. Any contracts or orders, they're not going to be covered by a sales contract as well. So you can do some DD, but you can't really cover those parts when you're doing your purchase. So a pre-pack administration is where an insolvency practitioner like myself is instructed to go and market and sell a business with a view to transferring that business as a going concern, usually on to somebody else, potentially onto the directors or somebody who's been involved in the business in the past. And the transfer happens, and it's the term pre-pack, pretty much instantaneously as soon as you've been appointed as administrator in the court. So there are significant amounts of work to be done by a prospective administrator, usually in a time-pressured short period before your appointment takes place. So high-pressured period of time for an IP. And the advantage for a purchaser here is that you get that seamless transfer of business. And really, the outside world won't even know that this has happened. You get to transfer with the goodwill. People tend to carry on trading with companies that have gone through a pre-pack administration unless they're owed a lot of money, because it's the easiest thing to do. And generally, I said about the intake of breath, pre-pack administrations are hated by creditors, because the first they become aware is a pre-pack administration. It's normally when they receive a letter from somebody like myself. It comes to the door or through an email, and they look at this email and it says, "Hello, Mr. Creditor. I've been appointed as administrator over this company in the last week. Since I got appointed, I've sold all the business and assets to a third party, potentially involving the directors, and you're going to get nothing about it. And here's my report as to why I've done it." And for that reason, it is extremely heavily regulated. And there's massive considerations if you want to go ahead and do this as an IP. You have to report to creditors and your regulatory body within a week of being appointed. So it's quite a time pressure there. Having just done one in March myself, so there was probably a 4 or 5 week period where there was intense marketing of the business going on, moving forward with an interested party, going through, agreeing a sales contract, going through those, as probably everyone's aware, in that those are the last stages of a sale where things don't always go as planned. You get the sale over the line, got this sale over the line on a Thursday, and by the following Wednesday, I've got to get my 50-page report off to the creditors and my regulatory body, and basically justify why I've done this deal, which involves a lot of people not getting any money. So within this case, there was, saving 30 jobs. There was a reason for doing it, a better return for creditors, and if the company had been liquidated, and my full report had to go out, and obviously to the ICAW, my regulatory body, to explain why I'd done it. So you're putting yourself out there potentially for quite a lot of criticism from people. So heavily regulated. So this case I've put up on screen. It's a professional service company, but like many other companies during the lockdown, suffered a bit. They took on a lot of loans. There's some large creditor overhang, but there were some good contracts and some good work being done by the company. They had 25 employees that were good people that were working in the professional services in the accountancy industry. And I was instructed on an AMA, an accelerated marketing process, to find a buyer, potentially with a view to a pre-pack. An outside firm was looking to expand into the market. An outside purchaser came in, and they could see some potential synergies of taking on this business, taking on the employees. And they did this via a pre-pack sale. The 25 jobs were saved. So it was a good result there. And there was a better return to creditors than there would have been if this deal hadn't been done. A close down would have seen no dividend to creditors at all. So the key points in this case for the purchaser were they actually offered the purchase on deferred consideration. So there was an upfront payment and then payments over 3 years. But generally, administrators, if they're negotiating with a few interested parties, they're not going to like a deferred payment. They prefer to have that money in the bag to start with. So if you're going to offer deferred consideration, be aware that somebody offers an upfront payment might be seen as a better purchaser for the administrator than yourself. There was quite a lot of customers from Olco, and they had to go and approach all these people. Credit that they're getting from people in the past not always absolutely guaranteed to happen. So that's their transaction hiatus, I said. So there's some risk potentially for the purchaser in that actually happening. And I've put 2p on there. So when a business is transferred via a pre-pack administration, 2p is very likely, almost certainly going to apply. So all of the historic liabilities from those employees transfer to the purchaser. So all of those length of services, any potential redundancy claims, if this company is going to fall over in the future, if it isn't a success, would fall to the new purchaser. All those length of services and everything transfers to those employees. That's something to be aware there. And that's a good kind of deal breaker for an insolvency practitioner. You do actually transfer a lot of those liabilities onto the new co when they purchase. This is a case where I think the purchaser got a pretty fantastic result, to be honest. This is I put a liquidation on screen. It was the creditor's voluntary liquidation, so a terminal insolvency process. But I like to think of this more as potentially a pre-pack liquidation. This is a case I dealt with a couple of years before COVID, but it's such a good example that I think it's one to explain to people. So there was a company with over 40 employees in the Midlands, and I put their scanning machine on screens. It was a market leader in the scanning and stock solutions across the UK. They had some pretty clever devices that would go and count stock, scan stock, and would allow people to keep a better hold of their stock system. They had some big contracts. As I said, they had over 40 employees. I went up to see the warehouse in the Midlands, massive warehouse full of stock, which to any unsophisticated eye, not in the industry like myself, looked like a pile of junk. But they had a lot of stocks there. They lost a major contract. They weren't breaking even anymore, and with 40 employees, they were getting to a point where they couldn't pay their payroll at the end of the next month. The director was of an age where he was looking to exit anyway. He'd been looking to sell the business for a period of time with no interest. So I was instructed to close the business. No cash really to even consider trading for a period of time. And as I said, the business had already been marketed to sell, no real interest in it. So the notices went out to creditors, the employees were made redundant. And as those notices went out, I actually took a phone call from what I assumed was going to be a creditor of the company, having received the letter. And it was actually a person who was interested in taking on, potentially, it's like, well, I'm not really sure what I'll take on, but I might want to do a pre-pack. So I was like, sounds like good news, could be a better return to creditors here. But after our initial discussion, he made an offer that was verbally well in excess of any other breakup value that we'd been given from agents. He'd given us some advice on the stock and on the kit of the company, and even with taking into account some of the debtors that we're still going to pay. And what he really wanted when he got down to it is he wanted 2 of the salespeople, not the other 30 odd employees. He was interested in one particular contract and one particular scanning solution that they had in the company that he saw as as I said earlier, a market leader, but something that he'd like to get his hands on. So I said, well, please put your offer to me, go away, take some advice, speak to an insolvency practitioner. They know how to structure these deals. And then he got back to me a couple of days later, I think on the Monday morning, and said, what he actually would like to do is not go through a pre-pack administration, but wait for the company to go into liquidation, but also agree with the prospective liquidator, speak to me and negotiate a deal now that he would purchase the majority of the assets on the appointment of the liquidator. And the staff, as I said, had been made redundant a week before. There was a good break in trade, which is quite key from a insolvency and 2P point of view. And he'd taken his own advice on that. So I said, go away, take your own advice on 2P, and that there is always a potential risk that you might have staff 2P to you. So he went away and he came back and he said, well, I actually like to buy us up on the way. All the stock, which was fantastic news to me, because as I said, it looked like a large warehouse, which I didn't really know and couldn't work out where the value was. All the other chattel assets of the business. He wanted these 2 salespeople, which he was going to go away and negotiate with separately. And he was going to offer some more for the website, the phone numbers, the social media accounts, and potentially the name of the company. So he did this offer, and we agreed a deal. And then, as soon as appointed, we sold all of the assets under that agreement. So as I've put on there, it's been good for him. He did lose some goodwill because there'd been a 3-week, well, actually nearly 4-week break in trade from when the company ceased to when he purchased effectively the business. But it did allow him to pick and choose, and especially with the employees. He didn't end up using the brand name going forward, even though he did buy it, because during that insolvency process it had been tainted so much in the market. But he did buy the website to drive some sales through there. So I think quite a good example of how somebody picked up a business for a relatively good price there. And my final case study is a CVA. So a CVA is an agreement between a company, effectively the company and its directors, and the creditors, and they do this in order to compromise or defer payment of liabilities over a period of time. You can do this in any way, as long as it's not unfairly prejudicial to the creditors of the company. 75% in value of the creditors who vote on the proposal need to approve it. So if you've got a larger creditor who could block it, so say HMRC, then you need to actually speak to them and get them on board before you put this proposal together. For this example, it was a company massive in the defence industry, had some MOD accreditations in the company, but these MOD accreditations have been built up over a period of time. They were unassignable, so the only real way to keep that company alive and to not pay all these creditors, there was significant losses, significant HMRC liabilities, significant creditors. The only way they could do this was through a CVA, as I mentioned earlier, keep those shares alive and make an agreement with the creditors. So the purchasers structured their offer so they would buy and pay enough to pay 20% of the agreed creditors and an option to buy the shares for £1. So they would become the new purchaser of the shares, the new owner of the shares, but this was only if the CVA was agreed. So HMRC jumped at the chance because they knew the alternative was a liquidation where they would get next to nothing. This is kind of a key where you have to have the company that has to stay alive, and I mentioned Talk United earlier. With football teams, you'll often find that a CVA is used, especially in the football league, because your golden share, your ability to trade from or play in the league attaches to that company. So you'll find that often CVAs are used with football clubs in insolvency. There's no risk of novation as you get with the other 2 methods. So if people don't want to move contracts to you as the new purchaser, then you don't have to worry about this, because under the CVA the likelihood is you're going to keep those contracts. And if you did have any restructuring costs, such as redundancies or closure of certain entities, those liabilities can be put into the CVA pot and settled as part of your settlement as well. So that's a really useful way that you can deal with creditors through an insolvency process, but also get your company on the other side. Well, the good news for everybody is that I only have 2 slides left to go. On the first one, I'd like to draw your attention to the first bullet point and the word that's underlined, and the second larger bullet point that has the word with an exclamation mark at the end. This is a free service that we offer. This is a free review service. So if you send any correspondence you receive from an insolvency practitioner to me or any other team here, we will review it, and we'll do this absolutely free. We will do this no problem. We are happy to do this. And what we can do, as I've put on the bullet points on screen, we can correspond with the insolvency practitioner who sent this paperwork through to you on your behalf. If this is pre-insolvency, we can, and before the company's going into liquidation, we can attend meetings or decision procedures and ask questions to directors on your behalf, review the paperwork and suggest some questions that might want to be asked. We can also potentially change the director's choice of insolvency practitioner. So if you're really lucky, you could get a fantastic insolvency practitioner like myself or someone else from Francis Clark to be dealing with this case going forward. Potentially we can challenge insolvency practitioners' fees if they don't seem fair, or not within or too high potentially, and we will report on the outcome of any decision procedures or look at the paperwork and come back to you with our suggestions on it. So to remember that I produce most of this paperwork in the cases I'm dealing with all the time, so I can look through, find out where the interesting parts are and report back to you on what I think are the most interesting parts of this. And please don't throw this paperwork in the bin, send it to me. I'm sure my email address will be part of there and my phone number will be part of the pack at the end of the presentation, so please do that. Finally, last slide. So just a reminder about members' voluntary liquidations. So these are solvent liquidations. So everybody's getting paid, and these are for and are used when a company comes to the end of its economic life. And a lot of the time they're tax driven because distributions from an MVL, Chris and my other tax colleagues will give you the proper advice on this, but the likelihood is that through a liquidation you'll receive capital treatment of your distributions, and potentially a lot of people will receive what's called entrepreneurs relief or the ADR relief. So they get some particularly good rates of dividends coming out of the liquidation. So quite a lot of these are tax driven. And I spoke earlier about the likely change in potential government or political attitude to tax later in the year. So a lot of people are moving forward with these and pushing for us to get these done, while they know what their potential tax rate might be in these liquidations. And the other reason we're seeing a lot of these is that I showed you the graph about moving in the economy and insolvency statistics. So what I found a lot over the last couple of years, I'm dealing with a couple at the moment, is there's some companies that before the pandemic, before the cost of living crisis, were successful companies, made a lot of profit, but things have changed in the world, and these people have taken a step back and thought, well, potentially we're not making as much profit as we used to, we're not getting as much money out of this company as we used to. We can pay everybody off, and they're doing what's called I refer to as an organised wind down. So they're winding down the company, taking out their money through a liquidation, and closing it with somebody like myself, to get to the end of the life and take the money out. So I'm seeing a lot more of those as well, so something to consider. That's actually the end of my session, and thank you to everybody for listening.